Hello, everyone. My name is Issac Theophilos. Welcome to Outstanding Care Home Business Podcast. Today, we have an amazing, special, super person, Cedi Frederick, as our guest. He is very, very special to me at a personal level. The reason is when I resigned my job as a care home manager, I stepped into consultancy. I had some mentorship from him during the early stages of my consulting business journey. The amount of wisdom that sent me in the right direction to reach where I am now, Sedi was one of the beginners to instill that motivation in me. If you look at his LinkedIn page, most of the people, we just have to scroll one or two times to get to the bottom of all the experiences. But Sedi's, you will have to sit there and scroll throughout the day in order to get to the very bottom. He's an amazing person with a lot of experience and a lot of years of wisdom. He has worked as a CEO of a large corporate company. He has a non-executive experience. He has worked with Department of Health and Social Care. He's a chair of Kent and Medway. And he's part of so many journeys. And I'm often surprised that how Cedi manages all of this in his time. So along with that, just getting 1 hour to record him today is a miracle for myself. So Cedi, welcome to my podcast. Thank you for your time, first of all. And here you are after so many weeks of pestering you to join us.
Isaac, thank you very much indeed. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to contribute to the podcast. Thank you for your very, very kind words. I'm not quite sure I deserve them, but thank you nevertheless. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Sadie. Shall we start with your childhood experience, of it, how your childhood has really helped you to where you are now?
Thank you. I, des I described myself as a son of Windrush. So my parents came to London from Grenada, a small island in the Caribbean, in around about 1955. My father came first and he secured a single room in a shared house in South London. And then my mother arrived about 6 months later. And as your listeners will be aware, at that time, it was very much a case of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. My parents came to, I guess, secure a better life for themselves after Grenada, a very small island measuring 17 miles by 12 miles, had been struck by a very, very strong hurricane, Hurricane Janet. And many of the young people left the island and went to America, Canada, and England. And of course, my parents came to London. And I was born and I grew up initially in that one room in a shared house in South London with an outside toilet. And vaguely remember, the chap across the hallway of the house moved out. So my parents then took his room. So we had two rooms in the shared house, one as a living area and one as a bedroom area for all three of us. So that was my background. And I guess from that standpoint, I really took the values of my parents. My parents clearly did not want to stay in that environment. They wanted their own house, and the only way they could achieve that was by working and working very, very hard. And gradually, they were able to save enough money to buy their first house. And I saw how hard my parents worked. And I think that really instilled, not just in me, but in my brother and sister, a really strong work ethic. I think it's fair to say that my parents came to London to serve, and they were very, very committed to public service. They came to play their part. They were genuinely honoured to come to London, and they came to play a part in contributing to the country. And I think certainly from my perspective and my sister and brother, there was very much a sense of public service. So that was really important, and it stayed with me ever since. I also think that my parents, who were very strong churchgoers, Catholics, their faith was very important to them, and the values that arose from their faith was important to them, and they shared that with us. So in terms of my background, I guess much of it comes from my parents, their work ethic, their commitment to service. And you'll see from my background, the overwhelming majority of my career has been in the public sector, local authority, not-for-profit sector, all sorts of different areas, but generally speaking, in the service of others. I hope that helps.
Thank you for sharing such an intimate personal story to our audience. I very much appreciate that. That's much helpful to see that from person of that limited resources coming to this new country, made a living for their own life, and then looked after the kids. And one of their sons has reached this high level in a very different roles where they can make a bigger difference. It's an amazing inspirational story, and I'm sure a lot of people who are at this stage, who are looking to have no hope, can get inspired by your story to come up and do something in their life so that they can make a difference to others as well. It's not very easy to talk about the struggles that, it's quite personal and secret to most of us. And you're the one who taught me we have to share who you actually are in order to be more effective as a consultant or whatever your role you are in. I remember going for a speaking session, and then I took the phone and spoke to you, and Isaac, are you telling your story? And I said no. And then you insisted that I said my story, and that really well appreciated by the audience during that stage. We can never run away from where we started, can we? Thank you very much for
Thank you.
sharing, Cedi.
That's an absolute pleasure. And from my perspective, Isaac, I think just to build on that, we all have a story, and we can we should be encouraged to share that, because much of what we do is very much about relationships, and it's about building trust between individuals or teams or groups. And much of that can come from when people see your willingness to be open and transparent and authentic. I remember our conversations, and I was always struck by your authenticity. And that should never be underestimated. The world has changed, however, in terms of, yes, I was able to get on a particular ladder. My mother worked for a local authority in residential care for older people. And she started as, I guess, what would now be described as a healthcare assistant, and ended up as a care home manager 30 odd years later. You mentioned my sister and brother. My sister worked for the NHS initially. Then she relocated to America, and now she is a director of one of the largest healthcare systems in the States. And my brother works in the legal profession. So again, we're all in that space of working with others, supporting others, and helping others.
Fantastic. What a great family story. Thank you. What was your career journey like from your first job?
It's interesting because I went to what was then called South Bank Polytechnic in South London. And initially I studied for a degree, and then I changed course because I didn't like the degree course that I was on, and then did an HND. And when I got my HND, I was given 3 opportunities in terms of work. I wanted to be a building surveyor. And when I said to my father that I'd been offered 3 jobs, one with a private building surveying practice, one with what was the GLC, and the other with the London Borough of Camden, he said, make sure you take one of the public sector jobs, not the private sector. So I started working for Camden Council in the housing department after leaving Polytechnic, and was there for 14 years. And I guess I worked my way up to a fairly senior role within the local authority housing department. I won't bore people with the steps along the way, but it was an interesting time working for a local authority in London in the late 70s and through the 80s.
And what change do you see in the administration of local authority funding and other processes for supporting people who needs accommodation from 1970s to now?
I think there was a lot more resources back then. Obviously, we know, and this is being completely apolitical, Isaac, but we know that we have had a number of years of austerity following the election in 2010. But in the late in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot more in the way of resources. So much of my time in the housing department was working to redevelop existing council stock, compulsorily purchasing poor quality private accommodation, redeveloping it, and then letting it out. And of course, we were building, councils could build in those days, and we had a very large program of building new estates, new homes right across Camden Council. And clearly, as the passage of time moved on and resources became more and more stretched, and then with the 1988 Housing Act, which effectively took the responsibility of providing new homes away from local authorities and transferred those to housing associations, a lot of things changed. Now, of course, people who listen to this podcast will know local authorities are really stretched financially. Many are having to make some very, very difficult decisions in order to maintain their statutory responsibilities and duties. It wasn't the case in the 70s and 80s. Things have changed a lot since then.
I mean, when I look at 1970 to 2024, from my limited exposure to this world, the technology has improved, the transportation has improved. There's a lot of other resources which could actually create more time or reduce the manual input. But when it comes to the real productivity and how things are done by the local authority, it's questionable. We moved to the digital age in order to save ourselves time and resources. I think there's less manpower needed in comparison to what we needed in those ages. So that should be reducing the cost of those services less. So what's your opinion on that? Is having new technology, having new transportation system, or all this advancement during the over the period of time should be eliminating some of those costs, isn't it? Or do you think the local authority funding and all these measures by the government has further even reduced to an extent where they're not able to provide those kind of support to the public now?
I think the role of local authorities in general has changed dramatically. Certainly working for a local authority, as I did for 14 years, they saw much of their role as community builders. They saw much of their role as enabling communities to support each other, whether that was through youth services, for example, or after school clubs, dining clubs, gathering for older people, for example, and things like that. Unfortunately, the way the world is now, it's very much about transactions. It's very much about local authorities who have fundamentally focused all of their resources on adult social care, young people, children, young people services, and safeguarding. Very few local authorities have sufficient resources to really invest in building communities, sustaining communities. I think that's what has changed so much. You're absolutely right. I mean, I remember, many people will remember, in the old days, we didn't have sophisticated computer systems. We had fax machines and so on and so forth. We didn't have mobile telephony in the way that we do. Now, all of that is in place, but has it really enabled people to have better quality lives? To a degree, yes. I would argue perhaps less so in many areas.
Thank you for being honest. It would be a dream to, if the local authority or somebody takes responsibility for bringing that community element back to where we started, because as humans we need that connections and socialization and community gatherings in order to survive as a society, rather than just being transactional or more risk cautious approach of safeguarding funding transactions. It would be a dream to have the neighborhoods playing together or having some kind of activities together, isn't it? So there's no enablers for that now. I think it has fallen on to non-profits more than local authority now.
There are fewer and fewer,
Yeah.
and we see in many parts of the country faith groups taking that lead, be it in churches, in mosques, in gurdwaras. A lot of those communities now are coming together, but it's very much piecemeal. It's very much hit and miss, and I think we are missing that. And what we talk about now, and we've seen it across our communities, are increase in loneliness, increase in anxiety, people really focusing on just getting through their day and not having the time or the energy or the resources to really share in the way that perhaps we tried to do, many decades ago. Now, that's not seeing the world through rose-tinted spectacles, I think it's fair to say. When we all look back and the world was fantastic, no, there were challenges back then, of course there were. But I can't help but feel that there was a greater sense of community. And I guess it's interesting now, given the work that you do, what you are trying to achieve in your work, because you are building communities in the care homes that you run. And those communities go beyond the people who live in the care homes, but I'm guessing it also will include their family and friends, and you're building that community around the delivery of your care services.
Yes, we are trying to go over and beyond on that to achieve that. That's very important. I think when most people consider care home as a last stage of their life, they are stuck in there, and there's no more sunshine out of this place. I think we need to get rid of that fear by engaging school children, getting out more often as much as they are able. I think there needs to be more enabling type of conversation rather than safety, cautious, safeguarding approach, I would say. Where, what is your journey to becoming a CEO? I think most people want to,
Yeah.
aspiring people want to know about that.
Well, it is interesting, and this is where I guess I perhaps share more than I would have ordinarily expected to. In my early 20s, I tried to develop and work to 5-year plans. So I had ambitions and the things I wanted to achieve from 20 to 25, 25 to 30. And one of the things I wanted to achieve by the time I was 35 was I wanted to become a chief executive. Now, the reason I wanted to do that was because what I learned working for a local authority, and it kind of fueled my ambition a little bit, was if you really want to make change, you have to get to the top of an organization. And working for local authority ascended the greasy pole, so to speak, and became a very senior officer in a local authority. But then I started to realize that actually I didn't have the level of influence that I thought I would on my journey to that position. And I kind of figured that the opportunity to become a chief executive, working with a board and others, I have much more opportunity to influence. I guess I've always wanted to change the world. That sounds kind of crazy. And I thought that by becoming a chief executive, I'd be given the opportunity to do that. And on that journey, I joined the board of a housing association, I think several years before. And the reason I joined the board of a housing association goes back to my mention of the 1988 Housing Act.
Mhm.
And it became clear that housing associations were going to be the drivers of new housing delivery. And I didn't really know enough about housing associations. So I figured the one way to learn about housing associations was to join the board of a housing association. And I remember there was a tremendously wise and experienced member of the board, a chap called John Park. And he took me under his wing, I think it's fair to say. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And he'd always insist that I sat next to him in board meetings. And he would talk to me during the board meeting. He would encourage me to ask questions. And one of the things he said to me was, you'll never know how good you can be until you're the person who's ultimately responsible. And I guess that may well be, again, translating that to the work that you do is probably the same as being a registered care manager in that respect. Ultimately, it's your name above the door. So I wanted to transition into housing associations. I wanted to become a chief executive because I wanted to be in a position to influence and shape. I'd already started to develop my own leadership philosophy, my thoughts around leadership, and I wanted to find a place that I could hopefully bring them into reality, into practice. So I became chief executive of a small, what was then known as BME, Black and Minority Ethnic Housing Association, and I was 34 years and I think 200 and something days. So I made my 35 objectives. May sound perverse, but that was me back then. I've changed a lot since then, Isaac.
Well done. Thank you for sharing it. So you had a 5-year plan and you had sort of a mentor who could guide you as well. And then you achieved your ambition. Very good. Well done. Thank you for sharing that amazing story. If you advise a youngster, what advice would you give them to start their journey to get there? Do you recommend the same pathway, or is there some changes you have identified during your career so far?
I would say that it's interesting because back then, coaching and mentoring wasn't a thing. But as I've reflected, I recognized there were two or three people in my career who were extraordinarily influential in my career. One of the managers I had at Camden, and he forced us as his team to take responsibility. We'd go to him with a question or a challenge, and he'd turn it around and encourage us to go and find the solutions ourselves. I mentioned John Park. Another was extraordinarily influential person I met when I became a chief executive, and she was a lady called Kate Davis, who was also a chief executive of a much larger housing association. She was previously director of housing at Brighton Council. I think she retired about 6, 9 months ago. But I learned so much from her, and she gave me so much time. And we had a relationship that enabled me to go to her with the most simplest of questions. And she didn't mind answering the same question 2 or 3 times because I didn't quite understand the first explanation that she gave. Now we talk a lot about mentors and coaches and so on and so forth. And I think everyone should have a coach. I really, really do. I've done work as a coach and as a mentor myself. And I reflect very much on how those relationships helped me grow, helped me develop, help my own confidence because, like many of us, I battle with imposter syndrome. But these were people, and there were others, one or two others, but these were people who really fundamentally changed how I think about myself and what I do. And I would say everybody should have someone in their life, professional life, and depending, personal life, but they can talk to without fear, who will listen, who may not tell them what to do, but will help them make the decision or make decisions themselves. I remember talking to someone who was quite skeptical about the need for a coach. And I said, so if you think about Andy Murray, I think he just won Wimbledon, one of the best tennis players in the world. He has a coach. Why do you think he needs a coach? Oh, well, said he, da, da, da. Even the best at their craft, be it sport, be it business, entertainment, they will have coaches. They'll have people in their lives who they're able to talk to, help them with just their mental and emotional state sometimes, help them prepare. And we all need that if we're going to be successful.
I agree with you. I found you as one of my mentors at the early start of my journey, and I have found some other people as well. And I'm glad that I can pick up the phone and speak to a few people if I'm stuck on something. And I think majority of the people get stuck at trying to figuring out by themselves, while they should have known that many people have already solved this problem well before you. All you have to find is those people who are willing to share the journey with you. That really helped me. I still reach out to people to help me as well, which I find it very interesting. And also reading books help me a lot.
Absolutely. I think some people find it hard to ask for help. Some people find they think it's going to be a sign of weakness if I ask
Mhm.
for help. All too often, they are surprised when they reach out. People are always willing to share. I know talking to people, they have been honored when they've been approached because someone believes that they can help them be better at what they do. We should never be afraid to reach out, ask for help. People will understand your motives for doing so. 99 times out of 100, people's motives are they want to get better at what they do.
And it's easy nowadays as well. All they have to do is go to LinkedIn, send a message to them. If you send 10 messages, one of them will respond. You can even get Cedi and myself on LinkedIn. It's quite easy nowadays. I want to explore. I know good sports person are good leaders. I know Cedi is, while sitting down now, he's a very, very tall person. Once he visited my home was not high enough for his how tall he was. And tell us your connection about your relationship with basketball.
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned my background, and when I was younger, I played a lot of sports and I was pretty good at most of them. And my father wanted me to be a cricketer, obviously coming from the Caribbean. That was in his blood. Living in South London, we would get the bus to the Oval, and he would sit there with his friends and while away many Saturday afternoons with me and other young people around them. But I discovered basketball a little bit late. I was about 15 when I discovered basketball and just totally fell in love with the sport. And as a result, I gave up cricket and football and running and really committed all of my time to basketball, which upset my father, but we got over that. But I've learnt a lot from sport. I was very lucky to become pretty good at playing basketball, and I played at a very high level. And I represented England in the 80s and did all sorts of things. And what I learned from basketball, which is a unique sport in that everyone can be a star, depending on who you're playing and the circumstances. If you, and I think that the term that is used is if you've got the hot hand, your teammates give you the ball. So it's a very different approach to leadership. Sometimes you lead from the front, so you'll be the guy who scores lots and lots of points. But sometimes you lead from behind because you're the guy who's passing the ball to the guy who's got the hot hand. And what I learned in basketball was the importance of team. And I was very fortunate to play on some very, very successful teams. And what I found was the most successful teams effectively coached themselves. We held each other to account. We challenged each other, whether that was in the weight room or on the court. And we understood that challenge was not about belittling your teammate. That was about helping your teammate get better. That was about saying to your teammate, we need you to play better to help us win. So I learned an awful lot as a basketball player and had a wonderful time playing basketball, traveled the world and really enjoyed it. But what I learned, and that really did influence how I think about my role as a leader, it is about equality. It is about everyone having a contribution. You mentioned the fact I'm tall. Yes, I am. But on our team, there were guys who were taller than I am. And there were
Wow.
guys who were much shorter. Everyone had a role to play. And it was how that team came together, where everyone knowing what their contribution needed to be, that led to us being successful. I haven't mentioned it, but my wife and I have two sons who were both very, very good basketball players. They both went to America to study and play basketball. And when I stopped playing basketball, I became a coach. And I learned so much coaching young players through to professionals. You don't coach professional basketball players in the same way that you coach an under 16 team, for example. So that sporting background, that sporting career as a coach of many, many years, and as a player, I would say really helped me hone my thinking as a leader. And when I stopped full-time working and established my own small consultancy, I really focused on leadership and I focused on teams because fundamentally in most organizations, the success of the organization comes from its leadership, but also comes from the teams that you develop and establish and the culture within those teams. And I think that's really, really important for us all to think about because ultimately, in the social care space, for example, the registered care home manager establishes the culture in their care home that either delivers wonderful, great, person centered, high quality care or whatever the extreme opposite of that is. And what I learned as a chief executive in social care was that I could have the most amazing conversations around the board table, but what really delivered the quality of care that we were looking for was the quality of the manager in that care home.
It's a frontline leadership, isn't it?
It is, organizations talk about culture a lot. I sometimes wonder if they really understand what that means, what it means in a team environment. Because if you are working in a care home and you, in the case of my organizations I ran, were 50 or 100 miles away from head office, you never went to head office.
No.
People from head office would come in to see you from time to time, but basically you were in a mini environment. There may well be a care home run by the same organization 2 miles down the road, but all too often the staff from one care home did not really go to the other care home. It was very much about what happened in that care home and how the manager and the management team in that care home established the culture of that care home. And that was what I learned running a social care provider organization as I did for many years.
Fantastic. I think most of the sports people will be good leaders. I think they understand the ins and out of playing together as a team in order to win. I know you were a company which had about 1,000 employees.
When I left housing, I went to work for a social care provider in North London that supported people with learning disabilities, autism, and
Hmm.
mental health problems. And I was there for 12 years. And then I went to run another organization that provided residential care for older people with dementia. We also provided home care services, domiciliary care services, about 5,500 hours a week. We had initially 19 care homes and about 3,000 staff across the portfolio. We did reduce the number of care homes because we closed some care homes. We built some new care homes with ensuite facilities and better communal space, better design, and so on. So in terms of the number of beds, they still remain the same, but the number of care homes reduced. And that's where I learned so much working in social care, running organizations that were very much about being person-centered, values-driven, and how that interaction on a day-to-day basis with individuals, something I used to describe as magic moments, was so important. I remember going to one of our care homes and sitting in the lounge of the care home for a couple of hours. And the first 15 minutes, people would come up to me and ask me if I was okay. And I would say, I'm fine, I'm just sitting. What I was doing was just observing. And what I observed were some of our care staff who, even when they walked past a resident in a chair, would just spend half a second, would make eye contact, would maybe touch them on the shoulder, ask them how they are. And I also noticed some members of staff who did not do that. They would literally walk past the resident, did not stop for a second, did not make eye contact. So we then started talking about magic moments, and every interaction between a member of staff and a resident should be a magic moment. And I've used the example of when you go to a restaurant, it could be a Michelin star restaurant, but how you are greeted by the maitre d' when you arrive at that restaurant will determine how you feel about your entire experience. It doesn't really matter what the restaurant is, but if when you arrive, the maitre d' or the person at the desk is indifferent, does not take care in terms of your experience, that will affect how you feel about your meal. And I made the point to my colleagues, it's the same in a residential care home. How you create that atmosphere where every member of staff takes it as a personal responsibility to create magic moments for the residents is hugely important. And that's what will define or separate good care home from one that is not so good.
Fantastic. Totally agree with you. I think 15 minutes, 20 minutes, we do personal care. That may be the only time the resident is having a one-to-one conversation with another individual. So make use of that time to make a relationship with them during that time. It's very important. Magic moments, I borrow this word from you. And when you become a leader of a large organization, how do you influence the front line? How can you get access to those 3,000 people? How do you influence your leadership to those people working in the front line? That's always my challenge of growing my business personally.
I think you have to get out there. In the old days, it was called management by walking about. I think you have to get out and talk to people. You've got to go to where they are. I remember holding staff briefings on a regular basis right across the organization. Sometimes I would hold a staff briefing and only 3 people could make it, determine that I would continue to hold staff briefings. I would visit care homes that we ran at weekends. I would go in the evening. I would talk to families. I think that was really, really important. And I think that it's not people understand, the care sector is very hierarchical. So people understand if you're the chief executive or you're the regional director, they understand what that means and they understand you have different responsibilities. I believe that leadership should be a very personal relationship. One of the challenges I set myself, and I know I failed time and time again, was to remember as many names as possible of our staff. So you go into a care home, yes, people have their badges on and so on and so forth, but people wanted to be talked to by their names. And I remember being told that in one of the situations, my predecessor would go to a care home, go straight to the manager's office, close the door, talk to the manager, leave the manager's office, leave the care home, get in his car and drive away. Now, you're not going to get the best out of people if that's how they think you think about them.
It's true.
So I think leadership is very much about a personal relationship. I think it's about sharing messages directly. It's about inviting people to hold you to account. One of the things that I did when I ran a social care provider down in Kent was I remember writing to all of our managers and many others, and I asked them to name for me the most influential people in their care. And that may have been people who were not always influential in a positive way, but there are people who may well be influential in a negative way. And I put together a group of what I describe as a top 100. Now, these do not include managers. In some cases, they included the chef, the cook, or the maintenance person, but these were people that other people listened to. And I interacted intensively with the top 100. I had away days with the top 100 where they could ask me questions. I could share with them why we were changing things, what the journey was. And of course, what then would happen is at some point in the future, the home would get a message or an email or something, and people would say, oh, what now? And that person who is or was an influencer, because he or she had been involved in a discussion with me directly, because they had the opportunity to challenge and question me, they would be able to say to that person, oh, I know about that. What they're trying to do is X, Y, or Z. And that person would then say, oh, okay, because that message had come from someone who was influential in that care home. So focusing on the top 100, it's not a unique way of working. Many people do it. It's hugely important.
That's an amazing strategy. Thank you for sharing it. I know you're heavily influenced in NHS leadership now. You work on both sides now. So what's your perspective? How can we, yeah, I know what are the challenges in sort of like a minimum understanding about what's the challenges NHS is facing, understand what social care is facing as well. Is there anything that we could do better as social care providers in order to work better with NHS?
Well, I think when I gave up full-time work in 2015, I developed what I guess described as a portfolio career. And that led me to becoming the chair of a hospital trust in London. And now I chair something called an integrated care board. So we are responsible to work in partnership with local authorities, social care and others to improve the health and well-being of a huge population. I think the role for social care is a challenging one because the environment is challenging. Local authorities are under tremendous pressure financially. There isn't enough money to go around, I think it's fair to say. That's leading to the NHS being under pressure because many of the people who are in NHS beds at the moment really shouldn't be there. I think the challenge for social care, and I guess this is where I've become quite controversial, is a leadership challenge. Successive governments have promised to fix social care. From an NHS perspective, I always say you can't fix the NHS until you fix social care. It is a wicked problem. It's a tough problem to resolve. But I think social care really needs to be in a position to influence the government and its policy, but also at a local level. to be willing to engage directly with the NHS about how social care needs to change to support the NHS. So how many people who might end up in hospital actually could be supported to remain in their own homes if social care staff were better trained, if there was a different relationship with primary care, for example. So about keeping older people in residential care homes and in their own home out of hospital. I think that has to be fundamental. I think there needs to be greater investment in the training of social care staff. I think social care needs to be professionalized more. It has an image problem, and I think it needs to portray itself as a sector people should want to work in. I've argued that there should be a Royal College of Social Care, as there is a Royal College of Primary Care, there's a Royal College of all sorts of things in the health space. I think there should be a Royal College aimed at establishing standards. I do believe that all social care staff should be registered, and I think we should be looking to develop really clear career paths for people coming into social care who have the ambition to become a care home manager or a regional director. That's not a short-term challenge, and it will require a lot of cooperation. But my sense is that social care is unable to get on the front foot to establish the agenda, to come forward with proposals, really clearly worked out proposals to influence not just national government, but local government as well. And that's difficult, of course, because we know the social care provider market is extraordinarily fragmented. The majority of providers are SMEs, and owner managers are focused on just delivering the service. But strategically, I think there's a huge gap in how social care portrays itself, the image it has, and it's vital, absolutely vital, that social care really starts to change the narrative about what it stands for, what its objectives are.
Fantastic. I think the point that you recommended was one, regulating the social care professionals, which is a great idea. But at the same time, I think when we regulate something, the cost of maintaining that regulated professionals will go up as well, which may need more funding to pay all these people high wages, etc. The question I wanted to ask you is, integrated care board, they make decisions regarding the NHS hospitals and how the money is spent on different services. Any requirement for local social care providers to be on part of that board? Is any requirement for that? Because at the moment it's completely disintegrated. Although people talk about working together, but I think at the decision making level there is very less representation of social care colleagues I have seen.
Yeah. There is no absolute requirement for social care to be represented on the boards of integrated care boards. We have a very strange structure now with integrated care boards, integrated care systems, and integrated care partnerships. Certainly in the part of the country that I'm involved in, our social care trade body is represented at integrated care partnership level. At integrated care system level, that's very much about the relationship between the NHS and local authority and district councils. The role of the ICB is fundamentally one of health services. So in my case, we have a £4 billion a year budget, which people may think is a lot, but it's not enough. And it is about working with our NHS family, be they acute hospitals, primary care, community, mental health trusts, and so on and so forth. So there's a big focus on the NHS's delivery. But what we also now have is much clearer responsibilities to work much more collaboratively, not at necessarily ICB level, but certainly at place level and at neighbourhood level. So I'm responsible for Kent and Medway, and we have 4 what we call health and care partnerships. And that's where a lot of this work about working between the NHS, social care, local authority, housing comes together. Because what we've learned is that 80% of a person's health and well-being has nothing to do with the NHS. The NHS is only responsible directly for around 20% of our health and well-being. The other 80% very much comes down to how much we earn, our housing situation, our education, whether we have stability in our personal lives, and so on and so forth. All of these, what we call wider determinants of health, are outside of the control of the NHS. So we have a responsibility to be the best NHS we can be, but equally we have a responsibility to contribute to these wider discussions. And that's what we are spending our time doing.
Interesting. Yes. I mean, at a personal level, my own experience is sometimes I feel like there's no point in fighting with the system by suggesting ideas and recommendations. I pull myself back for not losing that energy and time in order to change something that I don't have a control of. That's just one small provider feeling.
Mm.
But I think we need to talk more exciting things than NHS and social care towards the end of our show. So, question to you, Cedi, what's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie, this goes back a long way, and it was Shaft, the original Shaft, where John Shaft was played by Richard Roundtree. And that goes back to my youth and growing up in London at a time when I think it was fair to say that it was sometimes quite challenging to be a young black boy, man in South London. And Shaft was where I saw for the first time a black person taking control, being occasionally going over the line. But I remember coming out of that film and asking my mother, would she buy me a leather coat just like John Shaft's? And she said she couldn't afford it. So I think I've, like a lot of people, everyone will have a whole list of films and books and stuff that will influence them, but immediately reflect on my experience watching Shaft.
Thank you for sharing that. And can you recommend two books for budding social care professional people?
Well, I think I mentioned my interest in leadership and in culture. So a book I would recommend, which has on the face of it nothing to do with social care, is a book called Maverick, written by Ricardo Semler. And Ricardo Semler is a Brazilian industrialist who inherited a manufacturing business from his father. And the relationship his father had with the workforce was absolutely horrendous. He would search the workforce on when they left the factory because he didn't trust them.
Mhm.
And when Ricardo took over, he fundamentally changed the culture of the organization, created what I guess is now known as self-managed teams.
Mhm.
And as a result, the business became many more times more successful. So I'd recommend Ricardo Semler Maverick. I would also recommend anything written by Patrick Lencioni. He's an American consultant who has written many books, a book that I must have read 10 times that he's written called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And I use that as a basis of some of the training that I did when I became a consultant. He produced a work that Patrick Lencioni runs a consultancy in San Francisco called the Table Group. He's written books, and they're interesting because they're written like fables. So they're a story, and every story there are lessons around leadership, around culture. So I recommend anything by Patrick Lencioni.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think Maverick was recommended to me. It came to attention a few times, but I haven't read it yet. But I will put it on my
Isaac, read it, read it.
Definitely, I am into it. Yes, it's going on Amazon today.
Okay, good.
Fantastic. And Seri, what's your life like now? What do you do for entertainment apart from pressures of NHS and social care?
Isaac, I genuinely describe myself as the luckiest person I know. So I've got a portfolio career. I chair Kent and Medway. I also chair a number of other things, other organizations. I sit on the board of a number of different organizations, including listed companies. So I've got a lot of variety in my life. And I think one of the things that I really value now is I'm in much more control of my life. I think when you're chief executive, it's very difficult to be in control. You're at the end of events, your diary is packed. I mean, my diary is packed now, but I've got much more control. So I spend time doing what I love, I think it's
And
fair
what
to
do you
say.
love?
Well, I've got a mantra, family first. I'm very fortunate in that we have two grown-up sons who are both married. We have four grandchildren. So family's important. I learned some lessons as a chief executive about looking after myself. I think it's fair to say that I didn't look after myself. So I exercise more, I practice mindfulness, I meditate. I always find time for friends. Friends are really important. It's also really important that I have something in the diary to look forward to,
That's
whether that is going out for a meal, going out a weekend away, going for a walk, whatever it may be. There's always something in the diary that I have coming up that will give me joy and give me pleasure. And I think it's fair to say that in terms of my personal journey, one of the things that I learned was unless I started to find a greater balance, I was going to burn myself out. I was going to make myself unwell. I was very close to it, I think it's fair to say, towards the end of my time as a chief executive. So I really made a conscious effort to look at things differently, look at life differently.
so look after ourselves very well so that we can make a better difference for other people. Yes, I
Absolutely.
truly believe that too.
Absolutely.
Fantastic, Cedi. And what's your future mission? Do you have any projects in mind? I know you are started a digital company. Do you want to share that with the audience?
Yes, 3 or 4 years ago, myself and some other people, we started a digital health tech company, and we developed some fairly whizzy AI-driven technology. And our aim is to improve the health of millions of people in the developing world. So our primary focus is working in Africa, and we are raising investment funding in discussions with a number of national governments in Africa, because that's where we believe we can make the biggest difference. And that technology, we believe, will save millions of lives in over the next however many years.
I don't think your calendar is going to be in your control anymore. Cedi, it's amazing to have you here today, and we'll have more conversations on specific topics in future if you allow it. And
Absolutely.
how can people get in touch with you?
Well, Isaac, you mentioned it earlier. The best place to contact me is through LinkedIn, Cedi Frederick. All my contact details are there. Reach out to me. Happy to have conversations with people who have a like-minded interest in just making the world a better place.
Fantastic. And thank you very much, Cedi. And I wish you all the good luck in whatever you are jumping into in the years to come. And good luck with all the projects. Thank you so much for your precious time.
Thanks, Isaac. Thank you for having me. I hope those people listening will find it useful. Thank you so much.
I'm sure they will. Thank you.